Directions on Microsoft. I'm Mary Jo Foley, the editor-in-chief here at Directions. Today's Directions on Microsoft briefing is the third of a multi-part series on licensing. Today we're going to talk about the next phase, which is analysis. My guest for this episode is Directions on Microsoft's Steve Kelley. Hi, Steve.
Good to be here with you, Mary Jo.
In terms of EA negotiations, what is analysis and why is it important?
Sure. So in the last podcast, Josh talked about the first phase, right, which was discovery, where companies should identify their perpetual Microsoft license entitlements and their cloud subscription, actual consumption through internal audit and reconciliation efforts. Then gather information from key business and technology stakeholders that informs as to what the correct products and services in what quantities to license going forward. So when a company is approaching their EA renewal, we often get calls from these firms after they have received a budgetary quote from Microsoft or the reseller, and it comes back 20 to 40% higher than what they're currently spending, what we affectionately refer to as discount amnesia. And that's a big jump that often wasn't budgeted.
That sounds like an unwelcome surprise.
So in the analysis phase, we input the necessary data into a spreadsheet model that allows us to put your EA spend in perspective. What did you buy last time? Were there any price increases on the products and services that occurred during your current EA? How much of your user base has changed? Have you gone up, gone down? Has that affected your programmatic price level? And is your price changed because of it? What discounts did you negotiate and on what products? A lot of times the negotiation teams change. And so there's a whole new set of people, trying to figure out what did we do last time. So we can model financial options of slow and steady incremental adoption of new Microsoft technologies in the future with add-on services such as E5 security or compliance, Power BI, Teams telephony, or we can do broader sweeping upfront commitments at renewal that would generally garner greater discounts up front, moving to a full E5 suite or something like that. We use our market knowledge to apply discounts based upon incremental adoption of key Microsoft sales incentivized products and services.
So when you talk about sales incentivized services, I'm guessing M365 E5 is one of those, especially because Microsoft these days is all about upselling more customers from E3 or below to E5.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there may be a few companies that aren't in the cloud yet. They're still on premise. They're still using, traditional SA licensing, software assurance for Office, Cal suites or Windows operating system. And so, Microsoft will still incentivize companies to move into the cloud, and get that honeymoon period discount. For companies that are in the cloud, that becomes a different bartering that goes on. Every salesperson at Microsoft is now focused on getting into E5, right? And they're paid on getting those licenses sold and user deployments coming up in this next fiscal year. But, that may not be justified for a given company. So, a requirements-based licensing mix, that's an important thing to option and model out in a spreadsheet to identify a value point and a ceiling spend level. I mean, what is it that we learned in discovery that you need? Translate that into licensing, and what's the max you should have to pay for that? You really need to know what it's going to cost you at your qualified programmatic EA discount level for just what you need, requirements-based. Both the historical dissected spend on your current customer price sheet, your current EA, to understand where your investment was, and then the go-forward requirements found out in discovery, with stretch options, provide valuable insight into where your negotiation should be focused as you engage Microsoft in renewal discussions.
Okay, that makes sense. So describe for me the steps that you follow when you're trying to assist a customer in their analysis. How do you create these models?
Establishing a meaningful apples to apples baseline is important. SKUs change, licensing schemas change during the course of your 3, 4, 5 year EA. And so looking at your current EA's license quantities at your historical programmatic price level without discounts, then at the prices showing in your executed contractual customer price sheet, this will show what discounts were negotiated and on which products last time. And then compare that to today's programmatic prices. Just some examples. In March 2022, Microsoft announced price hikes on various 365 plans that range from 8% to 25%. The latest release of SQL was paired with a 10% price increase. So this is starting to hit companies at renewal, and some of them heard the news, some of them didn't. And when they get their budgetary renewal quote, they wonder, whoa, why did my SQL line item go up so much? Or why did, my M365 E3 go up so much? Well, there was price hikes that occurred during your EA. So this will be exposed in that spreadsheet modeling exercise. And then we input this data into a large set of products, prices, SKUs, discounts, purchase programs, other fields that allow us to do numerous pivot tables. Maybe there's companies that want to put in different departments, different geographies, customer subsidiaries, so that we can slice and dice the data that way, bill backs of, say, Azure consumption or things like that, so we can understand where the spend is going, right? When we create these models, we can build any number of customizable fields that might be important to a given company's analysis. And this will help us dissect and understand where that 20 to 40% concerning cost increase is coming from and where we need to focus during negotiations.
Mm-hmm. So this is really a basic question, but how do you reconcile what you find out, what customers actually want and need?
What's learned in discovery informs which go-forward option should be modeled in the analysis.
Okay.
Do you need more flexibility in decreasing on-premise licenses while you pursue a cloud migration? I have a customer right now that's using a multi-cloud approach across AWS and GCP and Azure. And so perhaps modeling an EA subscription is the way to go, so that you could decrease your server core consumption year over year. As you move to licensing, say, Windows Server in GCP, where you got to rent it from them. Why keep those licenses on-prem and continue to license them in a data center that is dwindling as you move to GCP? And you can't bring your licenses with you in Google. You have to rent them under their SPLA. So that kind of flexibility, is key. Will you be expanding your use of Microsoft Defender Security or Purview Compliance Services, Power BI, Power Apps and Automate, Teams, telephony, and other new services like Sentinel or AI? Should you buy them as add-on SKUs, step-up SKUs, bundled, unbundled? Are you going to use them all up front? Are you going to slowly migrate to these services? What frontline user profiles make sense in your industry? So, compliance and legal discovery are becoming more broadly required, because even line level workers are getting email addresses, using Teams, or accessing their HR information, signing up for their retirement benefits in SharePoint Online. Adding these previously uncounted users in the cloud, that can result in a bump in spend to be aware of as well. And so that's an important thing to take into consideration.
Wow. A lot of factors to consider, for sure.
Yeah.
So next question I have for you is, are there any just basically general insights across clients that you've worked with that you can share? I know you've worked with hundreds of them. What are some of the things that you see on time and time again?
There are quite a few. So perhaps not too surprisingly, the 80-20 rule applies to EA spend. So it's very common to sort EA line items from largest line item to smallest, and then taking the top, say, 20% of line items, they usually make up about 80% of spend. So if you have 50 different line items in your bill of materials or your customer price sheet in products and services, then you look at the top 10 of those items, and I bet it'd be between 76 and 84% of your total spend. This is important because we don't want to get mired in discount negotiations on line items that won't appreciably move the needle. There are other items where you may see big discounts. For example, in the past, Dynamics could be discounted 80%. And while it's not a huge spend for some companies, they may have only a couple hundred seats. You'll notice that, that line item doubled or tripled. So, there are exceptions, but for the most part, you'll want to focus on those top, tier line items that are going to be the per user per month costs you want to negotiate. Another trend, to look out for, and it shows up in analysis, is this licensing creep we're seeing in products like Power Apps and Power Automate. Microsoft is promoting this concept of citizen development, which, goes outside of IT departments, right? And
Right.
gets other parts of the organization to, build flows and create business processes. And, there's a lot of kind of unknown multiplexing licensing rules in there that can draw in everybody that winds up being a part of that process or sees, one of these documents that comes through the flow. So this can cause runaway costs. And that's a whole, topic in Power Apps and Power Automate unto itself.
It is.
But, that is an area where we are cautioning companies in their desires to embrace that technology. It's also an area that Microsoft has been changing the licensing rules. It seems like the product and technology was deployed before the licensing was fully baked. And so that licensing is constantly being updated. There again, you're insulated from that during the course of your EA, but when your EA comes up, all that new licensing, whatever the rules are, now hits you.
How does anybody keep up with the Power Platform
I
licensing?
think there's been a new licensing guide every quarter for the last 4 quarters.
Yikes. Okay.
Changing, regularly. So, yeah.
Wow.
So, when Microsoft offers high discounts, on a small quantity of products that they know will rapidly expand in your enterprise, like Power Apps or Power Automate, they call that seeding. They know this is going to grow organically, and they're happy to give you a break on the price and watch this just blossom, in the next EA period. And finally, another example is oftentimes there's a lack of governance in Azure administrators. And so, Azure spend can get wildly out of hand. Servers are turned up. They're not exactly sure after 6 months or a year what they were supposed to do, but they were never turned down. And you just keep adding, VMs in the cloud. So that's just a few examples of how costs can get out of line if there isn't proper kind of governance in place.
What are some of the potential pitfalls during analysis? Even something like, can you go too deep when you're creating an analysis plan?
It's funny, too, because some of the companies we work with are maybe more engineering focused, more project, focused, want to do the analysis and play the entire, chess game and every possible permutation before they get into negotiations. And, really you have to kind of use analysis as a way of knowing, what is the range for what you want to buy? What's the range of spend that makes sense? And then, you have to be somewhat flexible and agile in your conversations with Microsoft. So certainly it's possible to get stuck in analysis paralysis, right? So, through models that reflect license needs identified from the future technology requirements determined in the discovery phase, we can identify worst case spend and best case discounted scenarios to get a good sense of what a decent deal looks like. And we can use that as guidance. If we try to map out every possible permutation of licensing a la carte pieces, and, if you just look at, purview compliance pieces alone, you can buy a lot of those a la carte. You can buy sub-suites. You can buy the all-up E5 compliance suite. I mean, trying to price this out in different components and, adoption over time, this could overwhelm and confuse and even fracture kind of key participants from departments in the negotiation process that are helping out. Legal, procurement, IT, and leadership might all kind of be scratching their head, wondering, well, what is the right direction to go? And then you don't have a unified front when you reach negotiation phase with Microsoft. So you really want to have everybody on the same page. You want to have a finite number of options that inform as to the range of spend that you should land on for what you want to buy. It's a good guidance kind of exercise. It's not meant to play the entire chess game before you start, right?
Let's talk a little bit about something that we call MEOs, multiple equivalent offers.
When I was at Microsoft, we did a lot of training around, getting the customer to look at a certain range of incremental spend, right? Yeah. So if you were just buying what you bought last time, that was good, but of course we wanted to upsell you, right? So we came up with this concept from the sales excellence group at Microsoft called multiple equivalent offers. Okay. And the equivalency is really, in the approximate spend level. It's not equivalent products. It's incremental spend, incremental products with your Microsoft sales team, but it's at about the same spend level. So they typically create good, better, and best EAs with discounts that approximate that same incremental spend level from what you're spending today, but at different overall license commitments. So, if you haven't done your homework and created your model, then all conversations will be focused on Microsoft multiple equivalent offers, MEOs.
So what would be an example of something Microsoft might propose to a customer as a set of MEOs?
A common sweeping set of MEOs for companies that are already in the 365 cloud at, say, an E3 level or E3 F3 level might be, as is renewal, but with little discount. And that's the good offer. And that's probably, quite a drop, right, in the discount that you got last time, because that was the honeymoon discount. That was to get all your users and data in the cloud. Now that they're there, you lose some leverage, right?
Right.
E3 then with E5 security or compliance suites, along with F3. Maybe there's an F1 option where we add workers who normally don't have a PC interface, like cashiers, janitors, for example, in order to give them access to payroll or tax statements, HR benefits, this kind of thing. All this with a bigger discount. So the spend is about equivalent, but you're buying more stuff. You're adding F1, you're adding some compliance suite or something like that. And so you'll get a bigger discount. Of course, in this EA, maybe not in the next one, but they'll give you some incentives to move up stack. That's going to be the better offer. And then, a full E5, F5 deal. That's really, where they're shooting for, right? And that's a highly discounted, incentivized with, end customer investment funding or ESIF to try to get you to deploy that as quickly as possible by spending that ESIF with a Microsoft cloud partner. That's the offer they might label, the best. But it may have no alignment with what your technology roadmap is, how quickly you would adopt some of these E5 technologies. Maybe you have other vendors in there with long-term contracts like Cisco for your telephony, right? So, of course, perfect alignment to their quotas and sales KPIs to get you to bite on the best option, but not necessarily to your roadmap. So, while you may need to be open to listening to their offers, you'll likely have to reinforce your budget constraints and repeat your requirements a few times before Microsoft creates MEOs that reflect, the direction that you want to go and your true needs.
Well, thank you so much for all the great information.
Well, thanks, Mary Jo. Appreciate you having me on.
Just a reminder, next up in the EA Advisory Series is Negotiation with Dean Bedwell.